I think that I want to talk about three things about this story that really grabbed me. And routinely, I would get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I would lay in bed and I would think about something that I had written 12 hours earlier, and I would just become obsessed that it wasn't quite right, that it was an eighth of an octave off. And I wanted it to sing. I wanted it to be Luciano Pavarotti, not Roseanne Barr. So I would get up at 3 o'clock and I would put on a pot of coffee and I would go back to work and I would look over that 4 pages or 3 pages or whatever it was that I had written 12 hours earlier, and I would try and make it sing because I felt that I owed this man everything I had to get his story right. This was a middle-aged father, and for those of you who've read the book, a devoted father, a father who, when his only son, a 16-year-old boy named Bearshield, lay curled up in a fetal position on the bottom of some dank, dark, cheap army canvas tent on Christmas week, 1878, dying of malaria. This is a father who was very motivated to keep the promise that he made to his only son. And this was a son that Standing Bear had invested an enormous amount of attention and energy because he believed that Bearshield was going to be the future of the Ponca people. The 750 Ponca people who had lived in this beautiful, lush Niobrara River Valley. How many of you have been to the, or maybe some of you are from the Niobrara River up in the northeast corner? Where are you from?
Plattsmouth.
I'm sorry?
Plattsmouth.
Plattsmouth, okay,
Yeah,
all right.
I went on vacation.
You went on vacation there. Well, then you know it's a beautiful, lush valley that the Ponca had called home for more than 200 years. They had sunk a deep cultural taproot into this land. And all of a sudden, some straight white man from, of all places, New York City, appears in their winter village and says, the great white father back east wants you to move. He wants you to move to Oklahoma. Even though you have not one treaty, but 2 treaties that says this is your homeland, we still want you to move to Oklahoma. Now, we all know that no Nebraskan is going to move to Oklahoma. We know that. We know that wasn't going to happen in the 1870s, not going to happen now. And Standing Bear and all the other 8 chiefs said no, but they were forcibly removed. They cut off the food, they cut off the water, they grew weak, and finally, to survive, they agreed to move to Oklahoma, where the first year they were there, after having been unceremoniously dumped on the land, 1/3 of the tribe, one of out of every 3 Ponca died the first year they were there of malaria. And so now on Christmas week, 1878, Standing Bear's only son lay dying of malaria. And this is a son that Standing Bear had sent to the missionaries to learn about the white man's God, to learn about Christianity. This is a son that Standing Bear had sent to a school to learn English, to learn about the white man's democracy, the white man's political system, because he believed, this 52-year-old man, Standing Bear, believed that in order for the Ponca to survive, they would have to have 1 foot in the old way of life so they could keep their cultural identity, who they were as a people, but they would have to have another foot in this new world order that was springing up all around them. And so the best chance for them to survive would be to immerse his only son in this world, to find out what the white God was all about, what the white man's democracy was all about, what the English language was all about. And that way he could straddle this divide between the old way of life and the new way of life. But in December of 1878, this 16-year-old boy whom Standing Bear thought was the bridge to the future was dying of malaria. But before his eyes closed in death, this 16-year-old boy made his father promise that upon his death, he would take his body and he would bury it in their beloved homeland back near the Nebraska-South Dakota border and not when you are engaged in a 3-year project, which is what I spent on this book, you have to really find universal themes to keep you going. Otherwise, you just want to give up and quit. we have kind of been conditioned to believe that, oh, if you want to find good universal themes, then you should read Mr. William Shakespeare, or you should read Mr. Dostoevsky, or you should read Mr. Hemingway. That's where you'll find good universal themes. But I'm here to conclusively tell you, although each of those may offer good universal themes, you do not have to trudge against some dreary Scottish, Moorish landscape. You do not have to trudge down some frozen, snowy street in St. Petersburg. You don't have to trundle across some bloody bull ring in Pamplona to find a story with a lot of good universal themes. You can find it right here, right along the Niobrara River. A story with a powerful constellation of universal themes that springs from the soil of our own homeland, less than 200 miles from where we sit today. This is a story about love of family, love of country, love of homeland. This is a story about perseverance, fortitude, honor, and courage. And those are plenty. There are enough universal themes for any writer, any storyteller, to braid into a narrative quilt that has a powerful story to tell, and some powerful lessons to convey to all of us Nebraskans and all of us Americans. Another reason why I really like this story is there was this strange number of white people that came out of the woodwork to rally around the flag of this 52-year-old father, this Indian chief of a small tribe in a remote corner of the northern Great Plains. And this had never happened before. This had never happened before. The Brigadier General of the United States, when he heard the full story, the highest ranking military man west of the Mississippi, Brigadier General George Crook, he was so kind of disgusted by this story that under the cover of darkness, he snuck out to the stables one night, got on a horse, and rode 3 miles south, knocked on the door of the assistant city editor for what would become the Omaha World Herald, and tipped him off to this story about these 30 Ponca who had come into his fort a couple days earlier, and many of the women had giant clumps of skin hanging off of their elbows and hanging off of their wrists like charred bacon, because the skin had been so dead by the frostbite and the killer cold. And he saw these people straggling into Fort Omaha, to the lower parade ground where they were detained, and he felt bad for them. This is a West Point graduate, a Civil War veteran whose entire adult life was spent fighting Indians. There's something about the humanity of this story that really rocked his world and got his civilian conscience to trump his military conscience. That had never happened before. The Jewish population in Omaha came out of the woodwork and started hitting up white people for money to defend an American Indian in a federal courtroom. That had never happened before. So there was this kind of endless parade of white people who came out of the woodwork at all these different levels of society to try and help this 52-year-old chief of an obscure tribe who just wanted to take the body of his only son and give it a proper burial in one of the 7 sacred hills surrounding the Niobrara River Valley, which they had used as their ancestral burial grounds for 200 years. So that's something that's interesting about the story. The final thing that I think is really interesting about this story is more on a metaphorical level. The first two, does this story have a bunch of universal themes in it? Yes, that's literally true. You can prove that. Does this story trigger a coming out of all of these different strata of white people that have never happened before? Yes, you can literally prove that to be true. The third one, you have to suspend empirical evidence, and you have to look at it more through a metaphorical lens, but I think it's equally as true. And I think that for 2 days, Standing Bear was on the witness stand, and he was being intensely interrogated by this brash young federal prosecutor, Genio Lambertson, who was trying his first case in court. He was in Standing Bear's face for 2 days. Who are you? And who are your people? And what is it that the Ponca believe in? And who is your God? And what does your God believe in? And what are the values of the Ponca? Bang, 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 for 2 days in Standing Bear's face. His words translated back to the judge and the audience by this beautiful, smart, literate Omaha Indian poet by the name of Bright Eyes. So Standing Bear endured this prosecution for 2 days, but I think if you look at this and step back from this and look at it almost as a painting of sorts, and you get far enough away where you can see all the dots and what the dots connect to, I think you can make an argument that it was Standing Bear, really, who held up a mirror to the United States of America in the spring, summer, and fall of 1879, and he was asking the questions. He was asking Americans for the first time in our history, who am I? No, who are you? And what is this God that you believe in all about? And what is this thing called democracy? And what are your values? Standing Bear held that mirror up, and he forced Americans to look into that mirror and to confront their image versus reality.